3 years ago, I started on this channel with the series teams we love. And now, I have the script ready to tell the story of Lola, MasterCard, that team that lasted, I don't know, 2 free practice sessions in 1997. I was going to record today, right now, sitting here in front of the camera. But Edmund Patrick Jordan, the founder of Jordan Grand Prix in Formula 1, passed away less than 2 days ago. At least, at the time of recording this video. And then I thought it was worth bringing this story forward, re-recording the story of Jordan, which is very entertaining, even as a tribute to its late founder. Alright, so that's what we're going to talk about today on Splashing Gold. As with every time we do a Teams We Love segment, it's evident it's impossible to tell the story of the team without mentioning something about its creator. As I mentioned in the introduction, Edmund Patrick Jordan, an Irishman, born in Dublin in 1948, had a more or less normal life, and at 15 years old, he said he thought about becoming, believe it or not, a priest. But he also faced family pressure to pursue dentistry. You see, neither of these paths was even remotely related to what he would eventually do. He didn't pursue either of these options, as we know, but even at the time, he didn't follow either of the paths his family would have preferred, and he ended up enrolling in a technical accounting course. With a diploma in hand, after 6 weeks, he found a job at the Bank of Ireland. For 4 years, he clocked in at the institution working as a clerk. I don't even know if clerks exist these days. Banks have changed so much, haven't they? But then a strike in Ireland's financial system, which resulted in mass layoffs, led him to seek a job on the island of Jersey in the electrical materials sector. It was there, during a period in 1970, that he first came into contact with go-karts. After a period, he returns to Dublin and, with some money he had saved, he buys his first go-kart. In 1971, he participates in the Irish Championship and wins. In 1974, already racing cars, he competes in the Irish Formula Ford Championship, and in 1975 moves up to Formula 3. In 1976, he spends a good part of the year on the sidelines. He was handed over to the medical department, so to speak, for having fractured his ankle in an accident at Mallory Park. In 1977, he moves to Formula Atlantic. He wins 3 races, and in the year 1978, he becomes the Irish champion in the category. In 1979, he returns with the money he had saved in Formula Atlantic to Formula 3, which was a more certain path to the top, as we know. And in that year, he would be a teammate of Stefan Johansson, who would even race for Ferrari, and also score a podium with Onyx in 1989. At that time, he managed to do some races in Formula 2 for a team that would become McLaren. But then his money runs out, and what does he think? Yes, the wisest decision someone could make, when they're out of money, to start a racing team. At the end of 1979, he decides to found Eddie Jordan Racing, and starts competing in various races in the UK with the drivers, the duo, David Leslie and David Sears. With David Leslie, he wins a few races and reaches 5th place in the Formula 3 Championship. In '82, his cars simultaneously compete in the British Formula 3 and the European Formula 3, winning a race in the European division and giving a test to a certain D.A. Silva that year, aiming to race in '83. After a deal fell through, D.A. Silva would sign with West Surrey, but Jordan would have Martin Brundle in his car, and Brundle and Senna would stage one of the greatest battles in Formula 3 history. Martin wins 6 races and is the runner-up that year, losing to the Brazilian. Senna, as we know, would move up to Formula 1 in 1984. Jordan would continue in Formula 3 in 1987, winning the title in that category, a first for him, with another familiar name at the wheel, Johnny Herbert. In '88 he thinks, "It's time to aim higher. Let's move up a category once more and race in Formula 3000, which at the time was seen as the final step before Formula One, similar to Formula 2 nowadays. In his cars, the same Johnny Herbert, who moved up with him to 3000, and another familiar name, Martin Donnery, the one from the brutal accident in Jerez de la Frontera, remember? In the video of Born Again. In '89, the first Formula 3000 title comes at the hands of another one of our group, Jean Alesi. Mid-year, Tyrrell requests Alesi's services to replace Michel Alboreto in the 1989 French Grand Prix, and Eddie Jordan says, "Look, I might lend him, but if you want to laugh, you have to make others laugh." This would indeed become one of his trademarks, quite the negotiator, with an almost unmatched ability to make money. It is also in 1989, already thinking about the next step, that he hires a very promising, young engineer named Gary Anderson. He would become known as the guy who signed off on most of Jordan's projects in Formula One. At the time, he was just starting his career, and Jordan already knew that the technical gap between Formula 3000 and Formula One in the early 90s wasn't that large. So in '89, they begin a preparation that would last the entire year of 1992. Enter Formula One. They then start building a car, aiming for the top tier, and the first test for Jordan is conducted by John Watson. Not everyone knows who this guy is, but he raced for Brabham alongside Niki Lauda, and also for McLaren, has a few victories to his name, and was an excellent endurance driver. And we present to you here some rare photos of the Jordan 191 without the green paint because it didn't have sponsors yet. Testing at Silverstone. Besides the quite bold lines, everyone was left in awe when the car was unveiled at the start of '91 with the sponsors' colours. 7UP, Tic Tac, Bank of Ireland. It seems he made some friends there. In addition to Fujifilm, Toshiba, in short, Sir Eddie was a machine at selling and securing sponsors. But a beautiful car isn't enough, it has to be fast as well, as we already know. And the Jordan 191, Jordan's first project, Gary Anderson's first project in the category, was fast. In its fifth race, the team achieved double points, with both drivers in the top 6. Remember, at the time, only the top 6 scored points. At the wheel, Bertrand Gachot, a very fast Belgian, and Andrea de Cesaris, an Italian who was quick, but also was de Cesaris. You know what I mean. This, for those who know Formula One, is self-explanatory, but, being fair, not everyone knows who de Cesaris was. He was one of the biggest eccentrics Formula One has seen in 75 years. At the time, Formula One was 41 years old, not 75, but it's not wrong to say, it's not an exaggeration, that he is one of the biggest eccentrics in history. They were doing well, the pair was good, Gachot was better than de Cesaris, but just see how things are. If the dice had fallen differently at Spa-Francorchamps that year in '91, Senna won the race, but de Cesaris could have made it to the podium. And it was, in this Spa race, that something historic happened. I've already talked about Bertrand Gachot's imprisonment in this video here, link in the description. But to summarize the story, Gachot had been involved in a fight with a taxi driver in London and used paralyzing gas, the famous pepper spray. Even before the season started, this was back in December 1990. He then had a criminal hearing in London which he thought would result in a settlement, but he left there in handcuffs. Leaving there in handcuffs led to a contractual termination. After all, it was he who couldn't attend the race in Spa. Knowing this, Ed Jordan was not obliged to even return the sponsor's money from Gachot, who at that point was behind bars. Half of the grid, and also half a dozen drivers who were out of Formula One called Jordan offering their services. And he ended up deciding to give a chance to a German who was racing with Mercedes in Group C. Mercedes, to avoid being noticed, put the money through partner companies, such as Tic Tac, $300,000 for the seat. Talking to the driver's manager, a certain Viri Weber, he asks, "But has your driver ever raced at Spa?" And the manager replies, "Absolutely, he has a lot of experience. He's done many laps there." Michael Schumacher appeared to the world for the first time. Before putting Schumacher in the car, they prefer to test the driver and go to Silverstone. Schumacher does a few laps, stops in the pit, and Eddie Jordan tells him, "Look, go slow, don't push at the start." And Schumacher replies, "But I'm not pushing." Schumacher would retire from the race at Spa on the first lap due to clutch problems. But he had qualified the car in 7th position, driving faster than de Cesaris in his first contact with Formula One, with the car, and the circuit. That Schumacher who was never all that and only achieved what he did. 7 championships, because he always had a better car. Well then, Flavio Briatore's Benetton notices a loophole in the contract Schumacher had signed with Jordan, and poaches the German, putting him in to race in place of Roberto Moreno, who is left without a drive, threatens to sue Benetton. Bernie Ecclestone steps in and smooths things over, gets Briatore to agree to a deal with Moreno, who receives some money from the Brazilian. Jordan then says to Moreno, "Look, there's a vacancy here." But he and Jordan also threaten to sue Briatore. And Ecclestone says, "Briatore, pay Jordan." And then, in this situation, Jordan overbooked a spot in Formula One, which he had sold to Moreno, who was going to sit in the car, and from which he had then taken some money from Benetton, because they took Schumacher away. 3. In 1. Jordan would conclude its first year in Formula One in 5th position in the constructors' standings, behind McLaren, Williams, Ferrari, and Benetton, and ahead of Tyrrell, Minardi, Dallara, Lotus, Brabham, Laris. In short, people with much more experience. After this encouraging first season, it was very difficult for Jordan to say no to the money and free engines from Yamaha, who had had a good year powering the Brabham cars. And thinking about long-term survival, he says, "You know what? It's better to accept this money. It's better to become a factory team, just in case these engines end up working in my cars." Wouldn't work. Gary Anderson describes the Yamaha engines in the Jordan in 1992 as boat anchors. The engine was heavy, fuel-guzzling, lacked power, and was fragile. The duo, Stefano Modena and Mauricio Gugelmin, ended up scoring just 1 point, with the Italian and the Brazilian, in his last year in Formula One, would have the 7th place as the best result. After finishing 5th in the Constructors' Championship, they plummet to 11th position. The year turns, he lets Yamaha go, and arranges to use Brian Hart engines. In the cars, he retains Ivan Capelli, and brings in a young Brazilian prospect, Rubens Gonçalves Barrichello. Eddie's reasoning was clear, and you can't say he wasn't right. Put an experienced driver, put a rookie, and one helps the other, or one raises the level of the other. But in 2 races where Perry hadn't shown anything worthwhile, he was dropped. In his place came the Belgian Thierry Boutsen. Boutsen would race alongside Barrichello for several races, wouldn't keep up with the Brazilian, and would be dropped again. Emanuele Naspetti would also take the position. Marco, who only drove 750 meters in Monza, and in the last 2 races of the year, the Irishman Eddie Irvine took over. How many teammates did I have? I had 5 or 6. I had 5 teammates that year. Compare boating. How many teammates did I have? Did I have that year? 93. Pichella, Naspetti, and Irvine. Yes, 5. I must have mentioned them in order. Even the penultimate race of the year, the 15th, on the calendar. Irvine's first in the car. The team scores double points. 5th with Barrichello, 6th with Irvine. On that day, when the Irishman got a slap from Ayrton Senna. Do you know this story? Irvine had raced in Japan, knew Suzuka like the back of his hand. Senna was leading the race. And then, at a certain point, Senna was battling with Damon Hill, and Irvine thought he was faster and decided to lap himself. Senna was furious, and even after winning the race, he went to confront him in the Jordan motorhome. They're in Japan. There are no images of the incident, only audio, and Rubens Barrichello was one of the witnesses. Senna went in there, fuming, and Irvine, in the Brazilian's view, was somewhat insolent, and it ended up in a physical altercation. 494. The duo is retained. Barrichello, Irvine, Hart, V10. And Gary Anderson had made a beautiful car. Rubens had an impressive year, securing a 3rd place in Aida, and 5 4th places in Interlagos, Silverstone, Monza, Estoril and Adelaide. And Irvine achieved a 6th place in Montreal, a 4th in the European Grand Prix and a 5th in Suzuka. Another 5th place in the Constructors' Championship and the team's first podium with Barrichello. The year turns to 1995, and then comes the long-awaited factory support from the French Peugeot, which had been with McLaren, didn't work out with Ron Dennis, and then sought out Jordan. The good year for Barrichello in '94 also secured the arrival of sponsors, and they then kept the duo Rubens and Eddy. But the new engine, which had power, also presented several failures, and at Hungaroring, Rubens Barrichello was in 3rd, entering the final straight to reach the podium. He had an engine failure and was dragging along the straight until he crossed in 7th. The highlight for Jordan that year was the Canadian Grand Prix, with a 2nd place for Rubens and a 3rd for Irvine, a double podium, the team's first. They would finish 6th in the Constructors' Championship. For '96, Irvine was taken to race at Ferrari alongside Schumacher, and then a familiar face to the team, Martin Brundle, came to fill his spot, who would have his final year in Formula One alongside Barrichello, even with this car, in such matters. It was a year without a podium for Jordan, with 2 4ths, 3 5ths, and 2 6ths for Barrichello, with Brundle also achieving 1 4th, 1 5th, and 3 6ths. And Jordan managed once again to secure 5th place, repeating for the 3rd year, in '96, their best position. Midway through that year, Jordan informed Barrichello that they would no longer require his services, and Rubens then had to make arrangements with the emerging Stewart team, which much later would become Red Bull Racing. In his place came Giancarlo Fisichella, a driver from Briatore, and for Martin Brundle's position, Ralf Schumacher. Jordan was beginning to establish itself as a mid-tier team, flirting with greatness. Something was still missing. That year, Fisichella would achieve a 2nd place in Belgium. Up to that point, the team's best result. And a 3rd in Canada, a 4th in San Marino, a 4th in Monza, a 4th in Austria, and also a solitary point in Monaco, in that downpour, where Barrichello was 2nd for Stewart. Ralf Schumacher, on the other hand, managed a 3rd place in Argentina, his 3rd race in Formula One, it should be noted, and 4 5th places, and a 6th place. With 35 points, Jordan secured, guess what, another 5th place in the Constructors' Championship. Always behind the big teams of the time, Williams, Ferrari, McLaren, and Benetton. For 1998, Jordan switched from Peugeot engines, which, due to political reasons and pressure from the French government, were pushed towards the Prost cars. In that enchanted dream that never materializes, or at least never succeeds as a super French blue team. Jordan then secured a supply deal with Mugen Honda, which was a tuner in place of the factory Honda, which never wanted to completely leave Formula One, despite having withdrawn. I think you've seen this film before, haven't you? Honda, much like Renault, exits and enters Formula One a couple of times each decade. This agreement would be good, but as you will see, in the pages ahead here in my script, it would also be the beginning of the end for Jordan. You'll soon understand why. At the wheel of the cars, a change. Giancarlo Fisichella is taken back to Benetton by Briatore. He had already done some tests for the team before. And from Arrows comes a driver with champion status, Damon Hill. And this would be the year that would go down in Jordan's history as their first victory. And it wouldn't be just any first victory, it would be a 1-2 finish. It was the crazy race of 1998 at Spa. In that massive crash, at the start, Schumacher ploughed into the back of Coulthard. Amidst the spray, in that incident which sparked a lot of debate, a real argument in fact, as Schumacher went to confront him in the McLaren garage. And in the end, Hill was first, Ralf was second, and he was closing the gap. And Hill then, an old hand, having seen it all in Formula One, starts pressuring Eddie Jordan on the radio saying, "Look, we have a chance of losing. A 1-2 finish here." In a clear message that if your other driver comes at me, I will defend, and we might end up colliding. Team orders are given, and the two cross the finish line. As they were. Hill wins, Ralf is second. Celebration at Jordan, but not for everyone, because Ralf Schumacher was upset. He went to complain to his brother. And Michael Schumacher, who was already not having a good day, tells Eddie Jordan, "I will take my brother out of your team." And Jordan responds, "No problem at all, just pay the contract termination fee." What does he say? It was a sweet revenge against Schumacher, who had been taken by surprise in 1991 and now had to pay to get his brother out of there. As you can see, Jordan is like the house in a casino, always wins. Michael finds a spot for Ralf at Williams, which would turn out to be a big mistake, because Jordan in '99 was going to be a challenge. For the first time then, the team enters '98 among the top 4 teams in Formula 1, being the 4th, surpassing Benetton. When Ralf leaves, another German comes in his place, Heinz-Harald Frentzen, leaving Williams. In other words, it was a swap. Ralf to Williams, Frentzen to Jordan. Everything was settled. Keeping the Mugen Honda engines and with a very fast and experienced duo, 1999 would be Jordan's best year in Formula 1. Frentzen had entered Formula 1 in 1994 and, listening to a podcast, from his own words, when Senna died in Imola, Frank went after him wanting to replace the Brazilian with a German rookie. He had been Schumacher's teammate at Mercedes in Group C and was considered by many to be even faster, but he had a somewhat weak mindset and made many mistakes under pressure. In '97, he moved to Williams, racing alongside Villeneuve, who became champion. Afterwards, when Newey left, the team went downhill. He didn't have a good year in '98, but was then picked up by Jordan and would have an incredible season. In '99, he would achieve 2 victories, one in Manikawa under a memorable downpour, and the other in Monza. In addition to a 2nd place in Australia and 3 third places, one in Brazil, another in Germany, and another in Belgium. Without any fuss, he would place the car in 4th position in Monaco, England, Austria, Hungary, Japan, and would snatch a solitary point in Malaysia, resulting in 54 points. And the team would be 3rd in the Drivers' Championship with a total of 61. So, if you've done the maths, you've realized 54 to 61. Did Rio score 7? Yes, Rio scored 7. 61. Rio did score 7. Yes, Rio scored 7. Mid-year, he becomes completely demotivated and Eddie Jordan even asks him, "Do you really want to finish the year?" And he prefers to complete the season, already with no intention of continuing. As a result, Jordan is 3rd in the Constructors' Championship, well behind McLaren and Ferrari, but also well ahead of the 4th, which in this case was the Stewart team of Barrichello and Johnny Herbert. Frentzen at several points this year was within reach of the top of the table, especially because Schumacher had that accident that broke his leg at Silverstone. And the championship ended up being contested between Mika Häkkinen of McLaren and Eddie Irvine, believe it or not, of Ferrari, keeping the front without, and Honda, with Jordan once again makes a move to secure some money, and places another of Briator's protégés, Jono Trulli, in one of their cars. Trulli was fast, especially in qualifying laps. Perhaps we find the cover of an Italian magazine here calling him the new Senna. But compared to the semi-stellar year that Jordan had, in '99, 2000 would end up being a fiasco, despite Frentzen managing 2 podiums and 3 sixth places, and Trulli a 4th and also 3 sixths. Compared to the 61 points of 1999, the 17 of 2000 were nothing. And Jordan plummets from 3rd to 6th position. 2001 then begins with a sword hanging over the team's head, because Honda warns, "I am supplying engines to you, and I am also supplying to Bar, which had debuted in 1999. And I am determined to enter with a factory team and a lot of money in one of the two. The stopwatch, or the result will decide. Whoever is ahead, I will buy. And whoever is behind will just be a customer." Remember that at that time being a customer team meant receiving worse equipment. Nowadays, this is prohibited. Oh Rodrigo, but I doubt Ferrari doesn't deliver worse engines to its customers. Well, it's written in the regulations, it's written in the contract. The team keeps Frentzen and keeps Trulli, and they score points with some regularity in 2001. Until at some point, it was never clear exactly why. Frentzen and Eddie Jordan fell out, to the extent that they no longer spoke to each other. So much so that in the 8th round of the championship, the German didn't even race, and Ricardo Zonta took over the car. No one ever understood what happened, especially since Frentzen was having a defensible season. He had achieved a 4th, a 5th, a 6th, and 7 rounds with 3 retirements. In other words, when he finished well. Some say that the reason for this sudden and unexpected disagreement was Honda's pressure to put Takuma Sato, one of their protégés, in one of the cars. And Eddie Jordan, wanting to gain favor in that competition with Barr, said, "You know what? Better put him in the car." While the issue with Honda, Sato, Frentzen, and a contractual fine that would have to be paid to the German was not resolved. And Jordan, doesn't lose money and wanted to hang that bill on Honda. Ricardo Zonta, who had some experience having raced for Barr in '99 and 2000, remained in the car, and he achieved a 7th place in Montreal. As the situation with Sato was not resolved, Frentzen then comes from Prost and Jean Alesi, who had already raced with them in Formula 3000 in '89. At the end of the year, the old 5th place in the constructors' standings is repeated, with a 4th, a 5th, and a 6th from Frentzen, before being let go, a 6th from Alesi, and 2 4ths and 3 5ths from Trulli in the other car. It had been a turbulent season, but despite the problems, they managed to stay ahead of Barr in the constructors' standings, which was the goal to please Honda. Turning to 2002, Sato comes in one of the cars, and the other spot is reserved for Briatore. Trulli leaves for Benetton, which was almost becoming Renault, and Fisichella comes in. It ends up being a year without podiums, but with 3 5th places from the Italian Giancarlo, plus another 6th, and another 5th from Sato, totaling 9 points, and 6th place in the standings. Once again ahead of Barr, but then the curtains open still in the middle of the year, and Honda announces, "All right, I'll buy it, but I'll buy it," with the complete exit of Eddie Jordan from the board of shareholders, and he can't even appear in the garage. Honda created a team with a Honda identity, and suspected, perhaps for some reason, that a team that continued to have Eddie Jordan would always be Jordan. But he doesn't agree to sell, imagining then that Honda would buy Barr and keep him as a customer team. But that's not what happens. Honda buys Barr and denies supply to Jordan, who is then suddenly left without engines for the following year. And then 2003 was already upon them, so he has to go with Cosworth in a sort of Frankenstein project. Honda's exit was dreadful in several aspects. Because the engine was good, they brought financial support, and also paid to have Sato in the car. And from then on, he no longer had free engines, and started paying for worse engines from Cosworth. By that time, he had already rehired Gary Anderson, who, when Barrichello went to Stewart, ended up following him. In the meantime, the technical side of Jordan had been left in the hands of Mike Gascoigne, a rather controversial figure within Formula One. Ask Cristiano da Matter. But then in 2003, against all odds, Jordan wins a race. What? That's right, that crazy Brazilian Grand Prix where it rained and no one on the podium was in the correct position. Because Raikkonen was first and ended up second, Fisichella was second and should have been first, and Alonso, who was third, was in the hospital. I've already told this story in the video about crazy races. It would be the last victory. There were 4 for Jordan in Formula One. This one was very, indeed, circumstantial. And the team, after this victory, had their best result in 7th place. Besides Bach and the exit from the round, Jordan had to face an expensive legal battle with Vodafone, which had already signed to sponsor the team, but changed its mind and left. From then on, the fate was somewhat sealed, and Jordan would have bad years in 2004 and would be put up for sale, and acquired by the Russian group Midland in 2005. They would race that year with Nick Heidfeld in one car, and Timo Glock and Giorgio Pantano would alternate in the other. They scored points 3 times, twice with Heidfeld, once with Glock, 2 7ths and 1 8th. In one of those, both cars scored points together. A track that held good memories of Canada. And it was also The last time, well, almost. I'll explain why there was one more time in the points and one more time on the podium, but I'm not sure if it can be considered. Jordan finished the year in the penultimate position of the constructors, ahead only of the also struggling Minardi. Mid-year, Ford informs, "Mr. Jordan, I'm selling my stake in Cosworth, so the contract is no longer valid. Either you negotiate with them, or you'll have to find a new supplier." At that point, he was without an engine, without sponsorship, and didn't know who the drivers would be, and then the Russian group appears, actually a Canadian with Russian origins, Midland, who offers $60 million for the team, seeing that the prospects for 2005 were to be modest and generous. Ruins. Jordan agrees to sell, and the team races as Jordan Midland in 2005 to not lose the money from the FON, because if you completely remove the name, the money is considered without a destination and is divided among the others. But he would no longer have any involvement. And the team, it's true, according to history books or Wikipedia, would achieve one more podium in that six-car race fraud in Indianapolis. Tiago Monteiro, the Portuguese. So that Jordan Midland in 2005 wouldn't be left without engines, Bernie Ecclestone steps in and talks to Toyota. "Listen, is there any way you can supply your engines to them?" Toyota agrees. After all, Bernie Ecclestone had influence. And they race that year, with Tiago Monteiro and the Indian, Narain Karthikeyan. At the end of 2006, Midland would sell the team to the Dutch supercar manufacturer, Spyker, which by the end of the year would give rise to Vijay Mallya's Force India. It would remain there until 2018, when it was sold to Pupistrol and the team became Racing Point, and later, Aston Martin. Many people from the original Jordan still work there today, and Eddie Jordan remained close to the circus, playing drums, commenting for British television, and recently his last major act was managing Adrian Newey in his negotiations first with Ferrari, and then with Aston Martin. Jordan lost his life battling bladder and prostate cancer. And he was certainly one of the most entertaining figures to have passed through the paddock, the last, in modern times, with a touch of the old days. So that was the story of the rock and roll, fun, cheeky, and amusing Jordan in Formula One. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like, it's free, it costs nothing, it really helps the channel. Do me this favor, do us this favor, and I'll see you here in the next videos.